Hello, hello, my love. I hope this finds you doing so well. I am so excited because this summer brings all of these exciting and amazing changes in my life. I was in a training this weekend and someone was saying, ugh, I hate change. Doesn't everyone hate change? And I just smiled politely because it wasn't the place to say, I love change. I always have. I've always loved moving and setting up a new space, and I love packing. I love going through things, and I think it is. It's that I'm very sensorial. I really love just touching all of my stuff and connecting with it, and I love the process of change. It brings a lot of excitement for me, and very little, actually, right now, no trepidation, just excitement. So we are moving, details forthcoming. We're in process. A lot's changing around here, and I feel really excited about it. The podcast isn't changing. Don't worry, you'll still find me here each and every week. Anchor's not changing. The Somatic Studio's not changing. Like the things that you look to me for, they're here. Don't worry. So, last week we talked about embodiment, which is a pretty big buzzword these days for sure. And this week we are going to talk about it within the context of emotional outsourcing, which is our codependent, perfectionist, and people-pleasing habits. And we're going to talk about how to connect and reconnect with our capacity to be at home with and in ourselves. So by way of a reminder, I think of and define being embodied, well, actually, let's start with being disembodied. So that's when we lose touch with our somatic presence and the intricate dance between our body and the world around us, our body and ourselves. We get stuck in our heads, more engrossed in our mental loops and gymnastics than grounded in our physical selves, disconnected from our bodily sensations, movements, and the awareness of how our body relates to others, and of course, how we relate to our own body. When we're not in our embodiment, we can get stuck in our heads, ruminating, tangled in the incessant flow of thoughts, and we get so accustomed, inured really, to this often incessant and rarely actually helpful mental chatter that we forget that there's a whole other way to exist in the world. One that's deeply connected to the present moment sensory experience. When we lose our connection to our bodies, it's like switching off a vital channel of awareness. Disembodiment happens when we tune out of the present moment signals from our bodies and get lost in our inner world or zone out completely. So for example, picture this. You're sitting at your desk, completely engrossed in a mental debate about a disagreement you had earlier. Meanwhile, the aroma of fresh coffee wafts in from the kitchen. The distant hum of city traffic floats through the open window. Even though these sensory cues are all around you, just waiting to be connected with, your mind is, I don't want to say trapped, but it often feels that way, right? In this loop, replaying the past as though you could somehow change it, oblivious to the environment, oblivious to your body and whether you're hungry, thirsty, has to pee, you're checked out. Suddenly a message dings asking, did you remember to lock the door? And you snap back into consciousness, into presence, potentially into your body. And you realize you've been mentally somewhere else for quite some time. Disembodiment also skews our perception of time. As we lose touch with our sensory and interoceptive fields, which we talked about last week, we also lose our sense of being fully present in the now. When we're mentally replaying that work argument, we're not here now. We're stuck back then. And this is what stress, distress, and trauma does too. It takes us out of now and into the past, or zooms us into the future. This focus on thoughts, memories, anticipations, imaginings draws us away from the immediacy of the present moment. Our time, our capacity for somatic, body-based attention, tuning into our bodies, diminishes. We become numb to the sensations below our neckline, disconnected from the rich sensory world our bodies inhabit. And all of this is a wicked bummer when safer embodiment can feel so darn good. And you know me, I'm careful with my words, right? Embodiment's not always the safest choice. We talked about that. We'll talk about it again, right? But when it is the best choice, oh, it can feel so delicious, right? It gives us this incredible way of interacting with ourself and the world, where we're just present to the minutia, right? To the feel of, take your hand and squeeze your arm, right? Run your fingers over the texture of your clothing, touch your hair, right? It can feel so good to be present right here with what physically is. So if any part of you is still asking, why do we want to cultivate embodiment? I'll say that, and we went deeper into this in the last episode, so make sure you listen to that. Oh, I have so much to say. It could be a whole other episode, but today I'll add 3 things. 1, somatic intelligence and resilience. When we're more able to actively step into embodiment and somatic presence, we build our somatic intelligence, the superpower to chat with and decode our body's signals and messages with ever greater ease and speed, which is really helpful in conversation and relationship. This kind of intelligence is a game changer for emotional regulation and resilience, and helps us to navigate our emotional landscapes with extra finesse and adaptability. And because you're feeling your feelings, you're noticing them, you're speaking them, in my experience, it leads to way fewer Vesuvius-like explosions. And we've talked all about that within the realm of self-abandonment, right? How often we shove it all down and then we need to apologize. It's a whole mess. So imagine this. You start noticing the signs of sympathetic arousal. So, oh, maybe my heart's doing a little tap dance, or my breathing's going a little faster. Whew. You notice it, right? Because you've been working with your embodiment, right? And you realize that's your cue to dial into some self-soothing magic, sparking up the parasympathetic response to bring back that calm, cool, collected vibe if it isn't the time and place to sit with the upset, right? Because we don't want to use embodiment practice to shut down our capacity to feel irritated, frustrated, angry. We need to feel all of that, but sometimes you're at a meeting or at school drop-off or in the middle of the grocery store, right? Right. So this isn't just about putting out the immediate fire. It's about building up your body's resilience, brick by brick, making you a powerhouse at handling stress and trauma in the long run when you show up for the short run, day after day after day after day. Your body starts to sort of realize, oh, I can trust this human to show up for me and not shut me down. Second, when we disconnect from our bodies, we lose access to this profound and unique type of intelligence. Our bodies possess an innate non-verbal wisdom that's often overshadowed by our intellectual thinking. The body intuitively knows when it's hungry, needs to move, is thirsty, what it needs to flourish. It shares this wisdom through sensation and the experience of the present moment. Without this connection, we miss out on truths that our minds alone can't grasp. Wisdom beyond our socialization and conditioning. And as always, before you go beating yourself up, all of us, well, not all of us, most of us got to kindergarten and learned, don't pee when you have to, don't eat when you want to, right? Don't nap if that's the right choice for you. And that continues in capitalism, right? So, lest you get mean to you for not listening to those signals, we were all trained up not to, right? Right. Lastly, being disembodied pulls us away from our sense of connection to the earth and all of its creatures who are all our relations, our little primos, right? Our little cousins. Well, some of them are huge cousins, rhino cousins, right? It alienates us from the reality of our animal nature. I've said it here a million times. You, my love, are just a taller toddler, and you're also just a perfect sweet mammal. By paying attention to our bodies and remembering that we're mammals, we get to remember the truth of our existence as animals amongst animals in the most beautiful way. We get to remember our place in this fragile ecosystem, our mortality, all of which should, in my humble opinion, when actually deeply felt, make us better stewards of the land, gentler on each other and more loving and kind overall. When we are connected with one another and deeply, deeply aware of our interdependence. So, how's a human to know if they're not embodied? If you're like, is it me? I don't know. Well, I will start by saying this. It's kind of a silly thing to ask because we are all embodied, right? It's not like an on-off switch. It's a spectrum. We can have different levels of embodiment and self-attunement at different times in different settings. And I would posit that it's not always actually the best thing for us to be super internally focused and like hyper aware all the time. I don't think it serves us to be so keenly aware of and to fuss over every little internal and external experience, right? Like we need to be like water off a duck's back sometimes, right? Just noticing, being the watcher of, but not always letting it impact us and particularly take us out of awareness and embodiment and into symptom and minutia awareness, right? I mean, it's just like how I don't think it serves us to be checked out or dissociated frequently. In shocking news for longtime listeners, this gal is a huge fan of what the Buddhists call the middle path. And while we're at it, I'll add in a call for intentionality, which is the thing I want the most for us, to live from choicefulness and not habit. Herein to be able to say, I want to be super present in my body right now to feel all of this. And to not choose that at other times, like when you're at TSA or you're at the doctor's getting a shot, right? You don't need to be like fully embodied then. Now, with that said, I'll offer up a little checklist because they can be useful. And I'll caveat that any of these things on their own isn't necessarily evidence of anything much. And most of them can be evidence that you are tired today, or you're jet lagged, or you have bubonic plague or ADHD, right? Patterns are the thing to look for, my darling angel love. Not noticing a little one-off thing and jumping to both a conclusion and a diagnosis, but rather looking for patterns over time. Okay? Okay. So let's explore some more subtle signs that you might not have access to as much embodiment as you might desire. Signs that aren't as extreme as dissociation, because that's kind of obvious, right? When you're like fully not present, fully dissociated, you're like completely checked out of existence. But these are signs that still tell us something's off kilter and are worth doing the math on to see what adds up, right? And if you're like, it's me, for every single one, no judges, it's just more information as always. And again, not evidence that anything has gone wrong or that you're wrong or that you're perma-effed or anything's broken, right? It's just more information, mi amor. Okay. So broadly, numbness or lack of sensation. This can range from not feeling physical sensations to like an emotional numbness that we often see in functional freeze, where one finds it difficult to connect with our own feelings. For example, someone might realize they haven't felt truly joyful or sad in a long time and have been living in a sort of constant state of neutrality or like in the middleness, right? Like blah, sort of like khaki kind of colored experience. And they might find themselves unresponsive to touch, right? I'll say, not that you literally don't feel it, right? Like I have had carpal tunnel. I'm not talking about like that kind of numbness. I'm talking about like not feeling the warmth of a hug and it like not getting into your, like someone hugs you and you're like, okay, right? Like it's the same as picking up a book or like having some mate. Like it's not, right? Or you don't notice the discomfort of a tense muscle until it becomes severe, until it's like Charlie horsing. 2, chronic physical tension. So persistent physical tension, tight shoulders, jaw clenching, which I'd say to a T, most people in Anchored in the Somatic studio are like, oh yeah, I have jaw clenching and my hips hurt. Stomach discomfort, which is like sort of the muscular discomfort, right? Like that tension in the tummy. That can indicate a disconnection from more subtle bodily signals, right? This tension often reflects underlying stress, emotional suppression, right? Holding things down. So imagine a person who always has a stiff neck and tight shoulders, right? By the end of the workday, they're all like seized up, but they never fully consider how stress might be affecting their body. What tends to happen when you're not that embodied is you can like sense the stress on a intellectual level, but you don't really realize the impact in your body, right? So maybe you wake up with a clenched jaw and you don't connect that to constantly worrying and overthinking, or how you like went to bed staring at your phone, ruminating, right? Looking at the news, looking at horrifying images. 3, difficulty identifying emotions. So without the ability to tune into bodily sensations, it can be super challenging to identify and name our emotions, because emotions are felt in the body, and disconnection from these sensations can lead to a lack of emotional clarity, which makes a lot of sense, right? And so everything becomes sad, mad, glad. We lose the nuance, right? So things that can happen is like we sort of don't even realize the emotion we're like deep in the midst of, particularly things like overwhelm or irritability. And we don't understand that those are actually coming from like the core root feeling there is anxiety, right? Or let's say you feel a heaviness in your chest, but you don't recognize like that dark heaviness, that's sadness. And then because you don't recognize it's sadness, right? It's so easy to get frustrated because you can't just snap out of it, right? I hear this all the time in coaching. Like, oh, I don't know. I just feel this like, I don't know, tension in me, but I just want to like get over it and get back to work or like get back to whatever, right? But when it's sadness or grief or loss, how are you going to snap out of it? 4, reliance on others for emotional regulation. When we are disconnected from our own bodies, there's a tendency to ask others, expect others, look to others to regulate us, right? So this can manifest as seeking constant reassurance. Oh my God, I had a dream last night. I'm just remembering this. I was at this like massive multi-block yard sale, and I was walking by a booth, and I was like kind of fixing my bag because it was like falling off my shoulder. So I wasn't looking at the woman whose booth I was walking past. I was kind of looking at my bag, and she goes, "Hey, are you mad at me?" And it was so fascinating because I'd never seen her. I didn't know her from Adam. I just was like walking by her booth. And she asked me the question that like so many of my clients need to work through, right? And I've felt that before, right? When back in the day, like when I was not embodied, when I was in wicked deep functional freeze right after UCSF, right after nurse practitioner school, I remember, and I'll get back on track, I promise. I remember texting a neighbor who like I was friendly with and we were hanging out a lot. Like, hey, I hadn't heard from her in like 2 weeks, and I texted her a couple times, and I was like, hey, are you mad at me? Like, are we okay? Is something going on? And she goes, I've been in Florida. My grandmother had a stroke. And oh my head was so far up my own butt, and I was so like in my own spin of like needing that constant reassurance, approval, validation, that I didn't even think maybe something could be going on in her life, right? And it's common, it's understandable. I'm not judging it. I'm just pointing it out, right? So if you're like, it me too. I've been there, right? Another example is constantly texting family or friends, like when you're trying to make even a minor decision, not being able to trust your own judgment, because your judgment is coming from your head, right? Your decision making is coming from your mind and not your body. It's hard to trust it, right? Those are the sort of broad categories. So let's look at some really specific experiences. And again, I share this for pattern recognition, and so you can be like, oh, I do like 7 of those things. Let me get curious. So mindlessly eating. So if you find yourself munching away on whatever it is, and you're not even realizing you're like hand in the bag, hand to mouth, right? And then you only sort of look down or come to when the bag of snacks is empty. When we eat without tuning into our bodies, we miss the cues of hunger, satiety, fullness, and it can be a sign that in that moment, we're disconnected from our physical experience. 2, fidgeting or restlessness. If you're constantly, you're unintentionally tapping your foot, twirling your hair, getting up and moving around without a clear reason, these little behaviors can be your body's way of signaling that it needs your attention and connection. And yes, I know all of these are very much within the neurodivergent mind space. I get it. Pattern recognition. 3, forgetting to breathe. I mean, obviously, like, you don't like forget to breathe, right? If you forget to breathe for too long, your body will. But like, notice if you're holding your breath, especially during stressful moments, or notice if your breathing is shallow or rapid. Our breath is a direct line to our nervous system, and when it's out of sync, it's a sure sign we're not fully present in our bodies, or we're in an activation or disconnected state, right? And having rapid heart rate and breathing when you're in an activation is not a bad thing. It's literally your body saving your life, but like, notice. 4, I'm going to mess up the numbers. We all know that. So I think it's number 4, losing track of time. So if hours slip by without you realizing it, and you look up from your work or your phone or whatever, and you wonder, where did the day go? Frequently, it can be a sign that you're so wrapped up in your head that you've lost touch with the physical and energetic flow of time. 5, bumping into things, tripping, knocking things over, more than usual. When we're not in our embodiment, our spatial awareness can diminish, leading to these little mishaps. Please raise your paw if you're constantly covered in little tiny bruises, especially along the shins. I used to be, for sure, and I'm really grateful to say I'm just not anymore because of all the somatic work I've done, and it's really pretty great. I think maybe number 6, unexplained aches and pains, tension headaches, tightness in the neck and shoulders. These are your body's whispers saying it needs some TLC and your conscious presence. Note that hyper awareness of painful bodily sensation is the flip side of the not checked in coin. Yeah? So there's a flip to it. 7, distraction during physical activity. So whether you're exercising, doing yoga, on your trampoline, which I highly recommend, or even just taking a walk, pause, breathe, connect. If you find your mind wandering constantly instead of being engaged with what your body is doing, it's just something to be aware of, right? Next, ignoring basic needs like skipping meals, not drinking enough water, not peeing when you have to. These small signs of checked outness, ignoring our biological impulses, they accumulate. And they're signs that you are not in this moment tuned into what your body needs, or that you are habituated to not paying attention to yourself, or that your hormones are kind of wonky, or a combo. Hormones like leptin, ghrelin, but we're not going to get in the weeds with that. Just something to be aware of. Difficulty relaxing. This is a they're all complicated ones when we pause and zoom out, right? So do you, even when you have the time to rest, you find it hard to actually let go and relax, right? Your body might feel tense, your mind might keep racing, and you can't really settle into ease. You're like, oh, let me go do one more thing. Oh, let me do this, right? This is a big one for folks in both Anchored and the Somatic Studio. We talk about it a lot, and I'll do a whole show about resting and how it's so challenging for those of us who grew up in emotional outsourcing. Finally, I'll often have clients in both Anchored and the Somatic Studio tell me that they come to work with me because they know they're not present in their bodies. They know that they're living from the neck up, and so much more is possible when they're fully present in their lives through their bodies. Maybe that's you since you're listening to part 2. Just maybe. Remember, like we talked about in episode 105, buffering versus conscious distraction. It's not only okay to be disconnected from your body sometimes, it's healthy, normal, to be expected. It is not the most supportive thing to be like 110% checked in and hyper conscious of our bodies all the time. Our nervous systems naturally pendulate, right? Move like a pendulum. And sometimes we're more checked in, sometimes we're checked out. Sometimes we're washing the dishes on autopilot, zoning out in a hammock in the sun. That sounds so nice. And then tapping back in when a loved one calls your name. Middle path, my angels. Middle path. Middle path. Thank you so much for listening, my love. It has been an absolute pleasure. It's changed my whole life to step into greater embodiment, and I hope that it's helpful in yours. If you want my expert support to deepen these practices, to get more neuroeducation about the nervous system, about somatics, to understand the functions and the happenings in your perfect body even deeper, I would love to invite you to check out my 12-week somatic and nervous system education program backed by science and nerditry, with a fair share of woo as well, the Somatic Studio. If you head to victoriaalbina.com/TSS, trying to make that complicated, you can learn more. You can join us right now. If you're ready to join us, you can learn more about my webinars, and we have a challenge coming up soon next month. And there's just so much going on, and I'm so excited to share it all with you. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for tuning in. Let's do what we do. Gentle hand on your heart should you feel so moved. And remember, you are safe. You are held. You are loved. And when one of us heals, we help heal the world. Be well, my beauty. I'll talk to you soon. Mwah. Thank you for listening to this episode of Feminist Wellness. If you want to learn more all about somatics, what the heck that word means and why it matters for your life, head on over to victoriaalbina.com/somatics webinar for a free webinar all about it. Have a beautiful day, my darling, and I'll see you next week. Ciao!